Are safety regulations created out of concern or mitigating insurance costs?
Is it safer to follow the rules or use common sense?
Are OSHA standards kosher?
Gotta wear the safety glasses. That's okay. Yeah, fuck the safety. Just guzzle it, man.
Fuck safety.
Enable program deep sea diving. Loading parent crossing line. Loading PC roster. Visualizing season 6 of Kitchen Sink Microscopy.
Okay, welcome to another kitchen sink microscopy with me, Casey, your lab friend. We would invite you to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It's the safe thing to do.
And I am Safety Inspector Rosenblatt. And Casey and I, we write our own music. It's available out there on popular music getting places like iTunes and Spotify and stuff. There's probably going to be a new song. I promise it'll be safe. So stick around to the end of the episode to hear something new or old. Yeah. So, well, I think we've already kind of indicated what we're going to talk about, but why don't you illuminate everybody?
Yep, we are starting a cover band. Can you guess which one? I don't think there was actually a lab guy.
No. Is it some kind of village people thing or
Yeah.
Wait a
No,
minute. I need to not have a shirt on underneath this then. If it's village people.
Workplace safety. There's a lot of facets to talk about there, but we could kind of start with is workplace safety really about your safety, or is it more about like covering their ass insurance wise?
Well, yeah. Okay, I gotta take these off because they're dusty.
Yeah, it's
July.
Don't
I will eventually take the rest of this off. For now, actually, this hard hat is surprisingly cool, even though it's really hot.
Well, no, that's exactly what it should be doing, because with all that space above your head is the same with the chef hat.
Yep.
Because it's so hot in the kitchen, it keeps the cooler air. Even though it might be hot normally, it's less hot than the kitchen
from the surrounding air and everything. Yeah. I think on the surface, like maybe the intent from a governmental level is safety in general. Well, and keep in mind too, a lot of workplace safety stuff, including OSHA, even though that's a government organization, it's based on engineering. It's like experience and like, oh, hey, this is the safety gear you ought to have because, well, I mean, it kind of goes, it ties in. It's like, okay, I guess it's like mutually beneficial. The company doesn't have to pay out for injuries or deaths or whatever, or the insurance company, which of course, yeah, insurance covers it, but then now they're paying more for premiums. So that's a bad thing, and also they don't lose good people. I mean, if somebody falls or gets crushed by something or whatever, well, that stops the workflow. Like from a just a purely numerical standpoint, that's a bad thing.
Roger got crushed by the machine today. That really slowed down production.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, even though maybe at the corporate level and the government level, it's just a matter of numbers, I think it ultimately is beneficial. And now, okay, speaking of organizations like OSHA, I think they can be a little too draconian and more like just doing things by the book for the sake of the book, not necessarily from a logical standpoint. It's like, oh, these are the rules. You got to play by the rules. Like, okay, well, but there are times where there's exceptions, I think, and they don't allow for that.
Well, so you were kind of curious about the purpose of a lab coat, and that's one fine example of something that is super important, but most of the time not. So a lot of the times you'll see laboratories where people are not wearing a lab coat, and it all comes down to common sense, because the purpose of that, the long sleeves, the long, like super long draping, I guess, all of that is designed to protect the clothes that you're wearing from minute little splashes of some kind of toxic chemical that might get into your laundry and contaminate your other clothing. Maybe it's radioactive. Like,
it could be caustic and like
harm, and also to protect your skin. Like if something splashed on your forearm. A lot of people were wearing short sleeves, whatever, and that gives you a long sleeve just like that.
And that's a pretty easy thing to utilize. It's like, putting on a hard hat or a safety vest or something. Like, it doesn't take that much. It's not really that much of an inconvenience, but it's a huge benefit when it comes to the workplace. Like where I work, there's certain areas where you have to wear a reflective, bright safety vest where there's forklifts moving around. And, they get really pissed off if you walk in there without one of those, for good reason. Because like, you want to be visible. Somebody hauling around a bunch of gaylords or something on a forklift, it makes you stand out amongst all the other stuff that's going on. And
I think the word is homosexual lords now.
It was a guy's name. He's the inventor of it, I think.
Oh,
yeah. But there are some things there, like, wearing a hard hat. It's like wearing a helmet when you're riding a bicycle or a motorcycle. Like, could you get away with not wearing one? Yeah, but if you ran into a situation, say fell off or got hit or something like that, well, you're going to be really thankful you have that skull protection.
You don't really have time to like grab it from the saddlebag or something.
And like you're like reaching down, like, and then like put that on right before you're like, no, things happen too fast. So there's a lot of stuff that I think, like safety things, that I think make a hell of a lot of sense. I mean, we it's thousands of years of experience and engineering and development of things. And it's like, it's like hard hats, they're really cheap, but very effective. Like, is it going to stop a big, huge steel I-beam from killing you? No. Are steel-toed boots going to protect you when, I don't know, like some heavy machinery drives over your foot? Probably not. In fact, there have been some tests that suggest that maybe the steel toe could cut off your toes rather than keep your toes from being crushed. But like that's an extreme case. Like, that's an extreme situation. On the daily, it's little stuff. I've been very thankful that I was wearing gloves and steel toes on multiple occasions doing some of the work that I've done, having a thing like a big ass heavy metal beam land on my foot and it bounced off the steel toe. And I'm like, shit, glad I had that on. Because if I had, some like, I don't know, some chucks or something like that, I'd be footless now.
Wow. Yeah. I wonder, like, what do you think about hazard pay? Do you think you would prefer to have a little bit more money, or just a little more assurance that people are really checking to make sure all the screws are tight and everything?
Well, I mean, I think if you work in dangerous situations, it is fair to pay people more. Although it's like, well, how much do they pay soldiers? Isn't that like kind of the most hazardous job?
Right.
But yeah, okay, you could make like 10 times that, being like one of those diver welder people that you know, like you live inside of a pressurized chamber under the water for like a week while you're doing work down there, or the people that helicopter, linemen that, or line people, let's say. God damn, that is the most sketchy shit. Oh my god, I
Oh
could
yeah.
not do
Yeah.
that. They make
Yeah.
a lot of money, and I think that's fair. Uh, and well, you know, if you the thing is, there if you follow all the precautions and do all the things that you're supposed to do, and you probably start to develop a sense of this over time of like, okay, well, this is a nonsensical safety precaution that doesn't actually change anything. But then these things, like, well, you see videos of people who forgot to lock out tagout and got melted by some high voltage apparatus that they were working on.
Yeah.
You know, that
My
like,
grandfather was a lineman in the 1950s,
mm,
60s. Um, a lot of his friends died on the job.
yeah.
He had his own fair share of shocks, but and to the point where he had built up tolerance to it. Even
Huh. That's
that's
interesting.
crazy, right?
Yeah.
Who knew you could have electricity tolerance? Uh,
Oh man. I
yeah, like my dad was playing darts against the telephone pole as a kid, real smart, right?
Mhm.
Um, and then he pulled one out and got like shocked. And he went and got his dad, and he was like touching it. And he's like, hmm. Then he calls my grandma over, takes her hand and touches their wedding rings, and she's like, "Ow!" He's like, "Yep, yep, that's a problem."
Oh man, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, going back to kind of the initial uh, concept of, is it more for the insurance or the company, or is it for actual safety reasons? I mean, yeah, I would say from the company, like if you have a small company, let's say, a contracting company that does construction and stuff, and there's 12 people working there, they actually probably do care because they know these are their buddies, right? They work together all the time. But a big company, a huge corporation, some kind of factory making stuff, yeah, they don't care. They don't
Yeah,
even they don't know any of the people doing the work. Um, so it does impact the bottom line, though. If somebody dies or is severely injured, they got to pay out for that. Um, and I guess maybe the end result is the same. Um,
yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's one of those situations where it could be both. Like maybe they have like of course, a monetary reason to be caring about that, but they might also genuinely care about their employees, and some of them maybe their friends, of course.
yeah.
So yeah, like yeah, it's not black and white, of course, but when it comes to like uh, some of the things like nitpicky things or
Mm-hmm.
things that kind of don't sound quite right, like they make a whole lot of sense. Um, that's I think where people get these ideas in their head, like what is this really about? Like we saw a
Yeah.
lot of that with the early days of the pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
where like they had stuff like everybody needs to be at home by like 8 p.m. or whatever. And it's like, does COVID like is COVID a night owl? Like
Yeah, the
more
freaks come out at
viral
night.
at night?
Yeah, like yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Well, a lot of these things, especially when it comes to government stuff, it tends to be overcorrection.
Hmm.
One little thing happens, and they're like, "Oh my god, we got to have a rule for that." Like, okay, well, but this is a very rare event. It's super unlikely. So do we really need to burn a lot of extra time? Like for instance, school buses, they have to stop before crossing railroad tracks.
Right. Yep.
Because every once in a while, a bus, like I guess the signal didn't work and a bus got hit by a train. I think it happened like once, maybe twice or something. And now every single school bus, they have to come to a complete stop and sit there for a few seconds before proceeding, which to me, I'm like, that actually is more dangerous, right?
Yep. Yeah. Think about the physics.
Yeah.
You have this giant bus that now has to accelerate from a stop position
right at the
tracks.
Yeah. Right at the tracks. Whereas if you were just hauling balls across the tracks, well, the odds of intersecting a train are almost impossible.
That's where you see that like engineering trumps logic, and they're kind of like, or like in the decision making process. I mean, not in the actual reality of the situation.
Yeah.
Like they're like, well, let's just stop and look both ways, just like crossing a road. But then you didn't think about the mass and the length of what you have and the speed of a fucking train.
Yeah, the train is going really fast, and your big ass bus is not going to be able to get across the tracks fast enough. Where like if you just continued moving, you would cross the tracks in the blink of an eye. And
not only are the odds of crossing tracks at a fast pace and getting hit by a train remotely small, but that also kind of depends on the remotely small chance of the little gate not working. I mean, okay, sometimes there's no gate at all, but
yeah,
like those two things combined are really not likely to happen.
It's very unlikely. Yeah. Well, and that's something a lot of the safety
minor inconvenience for them. So
yeah, it is. But there are a lot of safety rules and stuff that I think actually make things less safe. There's a lot of people who do they work on antennas and stuff like that, tall towers, and they climb them and stuff. And you're supposed to have 2 points of contact at all times, tethered and stuff. Well, a lot of people just don't do that. They just free climb. Like they have the harness and all that stuff, and maybe they might tie off at like when they're up there, but it's actually more dangerous to be focused on connecting and disconnecting and like, oh, oopsie, this thing is, I'm stuck on this thing, and you're dealing with a bunch of harnesses all over the place. Whereas if you just free climb, you're unaffected by that stuff. It's not a distraction or an impediment, because sometimes that stuff can get caught on things or whatever. And like, also, well, there's a certain argument to be made that there's like a false sense of security. You might be a little overconfident, thinking, oh yeah, I'm totally secure, and do stupid things. Whereas if you don't have any of that, if you let go, you're gonna fall and you're gonna die.
Yeah.
Very painfully.
I actually do a little bit of like indoor climbing, and the last time I went, there's a more advanced wall. So like this particular place has like an automatic belay sort of system, so you kind of can't fuck up. And me being a beginner, that's like a good place for me, because I haven't really learned how to like legit belay someone. But this particular wall is like, you don't have anybody kind of doing that stuff for you. It's supposed to be more like a mountain, and you got certain points where you do this like 2 points at all times sort of latching. Well, last time I was there, I saw some dude, like I just heard this wham, and I look over and there's this dude just like swinging like this, and it's like, oh yeah, that does come in handy, because he'd have been dead. Like,
yeah,
that was really high up.
I know, and
that's just doing it for pleasure, like not even a job. So
exactly, yeah, and that's sort of the balance between being overly cautious and being efficient. Because yeah, we could all roll around in bubbles, protective bubbles all the time. It's like, okay, well, yeah, that of course we would be safe. Like if you always had it, you live somewhere where water is around, like Tacoma or Seattle or whatever. Should you always wear a flotation vest just in case you fall into the water? That doesn't make any sense, you know. But if you're on a boat, there's a lot of people. This is the thing too. It's like people don't understand, um, and this is where I think common sense comes in when it comes to safety stuff. It really it's not on the government or the company to uh, provide the rules for safety. Maybe a guideline or a handbook or something like that. But it comes down to the individual. Like you have to be aware of the risks and take the precautions that make sense given the circumstances. There's a lot of people that go out on boats with no flotation aid whatsoever, and yeah, it's like they think, oh, I'm a good swimmer. Well, what happens when you conk your head and get knocked out and fall into the water? Like you're knocked out, and now
Right.
you're floating in the water, unconscious. Wouldn't it be nice to have something that kept you upright and kept your head out of the water?
Mm-hmm.
Like
You brought up something that made me think, when it comes to the government and safety regulations, there are situations where they issue fines for people not, doing these safety things, right? And one particular one that comes to mind is not wearing a seatbelt.
mm-hmm.
Now, that is a situation that only poses a danger to yourself.
Yes.
So, like, the fine for that is probably going to cover, like all the government's cost for, like hiring the medical examiner to come scrape you off the cement or whatever, and it's like, that's just there to benefit the government. That one for sure. Like,
Oh yeah.
you can't tell me like that, there's a lot of people being ejected from cars and torpedoing through like 5 other people. Like,
Mhm.
I don't think that's happening.
No,
So
no, and that's the thing. It's like there are certain things like, well, hard hats and safety vests and stuff that we have plenty of history and data to support that. Hey, it totally makes sense, just like seatbelts. Like you would be pretty dumb to not wear a seatbelt. That's kind of a dumb thing to do. But yeah, it is on you if you want to not wear a seatbelt. I mean, they they we have, geez, at least half a century of data supporting that the fact that seatbelts are like wearing a seatbelt is better than not wearing a seatbelt. Like there's a
right.
bunch of people who are like, oh well, like the steel toe thing, right? Oh well, there was this one time when somebody was choked or their neck was snapped by a seatbelt or something. But like,
Or
okay,
their
yeah,
arm was cut off.
yeah,
Like with
like,
Def Leppard, like that
yeah,
does happen. Yeah,
it
but
does happen. But
he could have been dead.
weigh that against the mountain of evidence on the other side. Like, how many times did seatbelts save a life?
Mhm.
Like countless times. And that's the same thing. It's like, yeah, sure, I know there have been situations where something just presses just the right way on your steel-toed boot and it cuts your toes off. But that's an anomaly. That's super rare. But
Well,
these kind of myths go around, and
yeah.
people disregard common sense stuff. Like
Well, like that false sense of security might be coming from, like, in the sense of seatbelts, might be coming from all these airbags that we have. Like,
yeah.
people probably have in their head, oh, if I get in a wreck, these airbags go off anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But you could still, like, if your body is not held back, physically restrained, the inertia that you build up, the physics that goes into your body wanting to keep going forward while something has stopped the massive steel around you,
Mm-hmm.
and these little like marshmallow things that, yeah, they can break your nose, but they're also still, not hard, and you could still kind of like slide through them
Yeah,
and potentially be hurt even worse, actually.
it could be. Well, and that kind of leads into I think Mythbusters did a video. There was this kind of idea floating around, or that probably still is, that airlines design the seats to intentionally kill the passengers because a payout for a death is much less than the amount of money they will have to pay if somebody's injured, and has to go through all kinds of physical therapy and surgeries and stuff like that. That's way more expensive than if they simply died. So the idea was, well, the airlines designed the seats to be intentionally lethal in an accident, which they actually
Boeing.
disproved. Yeah, Boeing. Yeah, they did disprove it. Like, okay, the seats are about as good as you can get, at least given our current technology and reasonable expenditures on building things and stuff like that. But there might be other stuff like that.
Oh, and again, Boeing using like 50-year-old planes.
Yeah, stomping like a critical panel into place. Yeah. Well, we'll do an episode about that at some point, I think.
Yeah, we have a guest lined up for that topic. So.
Mm-hmm. But it does, yeah, this does correlate with that.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, when it comes to things outside of OSHA, though, um, police, namely, like there's a job where it's quite commonplace in American news anyway, that there are situations that lead to either police killing somebody or somebody attempting to or succeeding in killing a police officer. Mm-hmm. And that does raise the question of safety in that particular line of work. Like what could possibly be done to mitigate that? Because it feels very draconian the way they try to do it now, and gang-like.
It's very thug-like, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, body cams, I think that would go a long way to changing things. And honestly, body cams for everyday people, you don't have to get like the Axon body cam system that the cops use. That you can go to eBay or Amazon and spend like $30 and basically get your own body cam. It's like the same thing with dash cams. Like, why would you not have a dash cam in today's age?
But these are things that might help you after you're dead.
Well, but this is true. But everybody knowing that things are being recorded could be a benefit in that regard. Obviously, when police interact with people, if they have a camera recording things, they get a little touchy about that. And there's certain jurisdictions where it's technically not legal for you to record in public for some reason.
Weird.
Yeah, but if you live in one of the places where it's totally okay, absolutely record everything. Have a dash cam, have a body cam. Like, they're pretty cheap. And I mean, it seems stupid to be like, how did it come to this? But it kind of makes sense. Like, if there's documentation, the camera doesn't lie. Like, testimony, verbal testimony, somebody recalling events can be, well, altered, or we all know how memory is. But if you have a video of something happening, well, it's kind of hard to dispute that. And maybe eventually that'll change things. I'm honestly shocked that all police jurisdictions do not require body cams. That blows my mind.
Yeah.
It also blows my mind that car manufacturers don't incorporate dash cams as just like a default. It's like $100. Jesus, you just stick it on there and there you go. Like it's not that much. Actually, there was a kind of a lightning strikes twice topic that I had thought of, but that might tie into this. Because it's sort of like, well, why isn't this a thing? Um, why why is it only commercial locations, be it businesses or industrial places or apartment complexes? Why are they the only ones that have fire suppression sprinklers? How come a house doesn't have that? Like it's when you're building a house, it's trivial to add. Like it would when you pay like five, six, $700,000 for a house. Who cares if it's an extra couple $1,000? Like to have a sprinkler system built in, I don't get it.
Mm.
Why is that not a thing?
We could actually have my biological dad on for that topic because he installs fire sprinklers. I've talked to him about that before, and I can't remember exactly what it. I think it does come down to cost. It's more than you would expect because like it's a trade, so he makes like a great deal of money uh, doing that. So like, of course, think about how well paid they are, but then there's the materials and all the insurance costs, and blah blah blah. So it does get pretty pricey, and that's something that has to be maintained or should be. I've heard a lot of stories about like he found some kind of like well preserved like 1980s Pepsi can in one of the tubes where the water goes through or something. Some funny stuff, but like yeah, like it is costly, but I asked him that very same thing. I was like, you know what, like that would make so much more sense than letting all these houses burn down.
Yeah. Well, yeah, when you look at it, the cost of recovering from fire or smoke damage is way more than a little water damage. Especially if you had, say, like smart sprinklers that once the fire was out, they just shut off. So if you weren't at home and a fire started, it would put the fire out and then turn off. Like, there you go. Like, we have the technology to do this. Why is this not like everywhere? I don't get it. Yeah, well, yeah,
aesthetics I think play into that too. People like don't want to look at a sprinkler.
I know.
Like, well, you're okay looking at a smoke detector, but that a lot of good that does you, when all your possessions are burning.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I like the passive kind of system. It makes a lot of sense. And yeah, maybe retrofitting a house, like say my house that was built in like the 1910s or something, that'd be a little expensive. But if you're building a house from scratch, it's pretty trivial to run a little PEX up to the ceilings and put a couple of sprinklers in. Like, shouldn't be that big of a deal. I don't know.
Yeah.
But oh boy, there's so many different things because I did want to touch on the nitpickiness of organizations like OSHA and stuff, and how they're like really like get very draconian about every little thing when it's like, these little things are not that big of a deal. And then these things, they all carry the same weight. But like, well, this thing could result in, I don't know, you might hit your tailbone on the floor, slipping and falling, versus, I don't know, being completely crushed and eviscerated by some kind of machine. Right? This carries a lot more weight to me than that does. But they like the rules are pretty much the same.
Yeah, that I feel like a lot of that has to do with laziness, like because logistically, like how do you qualify what's important and what's not, and then in doing that you're kind of creating this tier system that tells people, wow, it's not that big of a deal if I don't put my goggles on. My eye, like,
Well, but I guess my point, where I'm going with that, is that what the effect could be that people will see organizations like OSHA and their rules, and they're going to be like, oh, there's all these stupid rules, these little nitpicky things that don't really matter. And then they might become kind of cavalier about all the rules. Well, if they're making a big stink over this little teeny tiny thing that doesn't matter, well, maybe this other stuff doesn't matter.
Yeah. That's I suppose that's possible. And like there's also certain people that have this maturity level where just because they've been told to do something, they're like, fuck you, I won't do what you tell me. Rage Against the Machine.
Well, that's a good point.
And then they kind of like do something dangerous out of spite, and it's like, really, dude?
Very good point.
It's just a rule. Like, it's not breaking your spirit to just be like, okay, I'll put the fucking hard hat on, I guess. I look stupid, but everyone else is wearing one, I guess. Like you'll get over it. Following rules and doing stuff like that. It's like, there is a purpose. However much you agree with it, doesn't really matter.
That's that you hit the nail on the head right there. Is that I think it's important people understand why. Like, I think building codes are stupid as far as like the legal side of it. But if I were building a house myself, on my own in a vacuum, I would totally pick up the most recent book of codes and follow all that stuff, because it's like, this is not arbitrary. Somebody didn't just wake up one day and be like, oh well, the door, the framing of the door has to be this way rather than that way. No, there's an actual reason behind it, and it, when you look into the history, it makes sense. And that's a tough thing to get around. Like the engineering, it's an ever evolving thing, and
you kind of need, like, it's not like the best minds in that field will naturally coalesce to like volunteer their time to create and maintain these code books. Of course it costs money, and that money has to come from somewhere. And everybody that benefits from it will have to chip in a little bit, and then of course, like, then it has to, now you've got a growing beast. Like, well, now that we have this, we have to follow certain rules, we have to apply everything evenly, and before you know it, you've got a bureaucracy. And it's kind of like you can't stop that beast from growing once it's sparked. Like,
well, this is true whether it's government or corporations. You will always have bureaucracy emerge whenever like the number crunchers and pencil pushers are at work. It's inevitable. Like, you're always going to have it.
Because everybody has to come to some point where they're like, you know what, like, that's not worth my time to do that much work. And delineate how safe something is from the next thing. Let's just kind of blanket treat all these things this way. And yeah, sometimes it sounds stupid, but like, it's cost effective too.
Yeah, and there's usually a reason. There's always a reason behind the rules. Some of them, like the school bus stopping at the tracks, it's kind of dumb.
Right.
But like, a lot of things, that though wasn't just some bureaucrat waking up at one day and going to a meeting and being like, hey, I think we should make buses stop at the tracks before crossing them. And they're like, here, yeah, that's good. No, there was like a reason why they decided to do that. and that's the thing, is like all these rules, there's a reason for it.
Right.
There's something that happened, some way that people did something back in the past that turned out to not be safe or effective or whatever, and they're like, let's not do that again.
Yeah.
Let's do it this way from now on.
Of course, then there's times where they don't really apply the rules evenly when they should be. Like how hard they come down on drunk driving, and much less so on high driving, and pretty much not at all on tired driving. But yeah, I mean, that's like saying you can't come to the warehouse in high heels, but ice skates are fine, I guess.
Like, yeah, exactly. Well,
like,
you make a really
you're gonna roll your ankle either way.
Yeah, you make a really good point that there's a lot of changes that ought to be made that are not for whatever reason. And
that builds in a false sense of security too. People are like, oh, it's fine to drive high because they don't say it's dangerous.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things about all these rules and safety regulations and stuff like that, speaking about false sense of security, is you kind of could be pretty complacent when you're like, oh yeah, I got my safety vest, my hard hat, I got my safety goggles on, like life is good, I don't need to do anything else. What? Like, no, safety happens under that hard hat. Like, it happens in your mind. You are responsible for safety for yourself and for your coworkers and everybody else. And that, like, damn the rules. Like, like the rules to me are sort of a set of guidelines and an experiential catalog of all the stuff that we've been through and mistakes we've made, and things that we ought to be paying attention to. But like, you can't just be like, oh yeah, I got all my stuff and I could just kind of walk around like not a care in the world. No, you have to pay attention. You have to be aware, and be cautious of things, but maybe not so cautious that you take all day to do one thing that could take 10 minutes because I'm put on like layers of gloves and check my how conductive my skin is and all this stuff. Like, okay, maybe you don't need to go that far, but we have to. I don't know. Safety begins with us.
Yeah, you definitely have to use your brain. Like, just because you're wearing your PPE doesn't mean you can, to quote a song of mine, stick a fork in the power socket. Like, it actually, we should use that song at the end.
Yes. Oh, that's a good point.
Yep. Stick a fork in the power socket, light a match near the gasoline. Yep. Perfect. But yeah, like, just don't do dumb shit. Like, and it goes a long way to contributing towards not having these stupid rules, because like all these things are written down because somebody was stupid enough to do it.
Yeah.
In the first place. So like, don't be the guy that adds to the bureaucracy of safety.
That's a good point. Like, it could end with us. And all of the bureaucracy could essentially be a tertiary thing that's just sort of over there, kind of creating some documents and things like that for reference purposes. And if everybody just observes like common sense safety stuff, we wouldn't need any of that. It's kind of a double-edged sword as far as I'm concerned, because like, okay, it's important to have all these rules, but having all these rules and having this enforcement wing behind it also creates like this adversarial system, kind of like the cops, that doesn't necessarily benefit people. And it's pretty easy to dismiss the importance and the reasons why we have safety regulations and rules, when it's just like a bunch of, I guess, enumerated things in a handbook or something. When like, okay, these are not, okay, consider this. these rules, like building codes and stuff, electrical codes, and all the safety regulations and stuff, these are not just numbered, itemized things in a list. These are lives that were lost because somebody did something dumb. Somebody, and sure, do we have the right answer? Probably not. But this is the best answer we have now. And so it actually makes sense to observe as many of these things as you can. Yeah, I don't know.
And one thing also to keep in mind is when it comes to critical thinking, just because somebody tells you something about safety doesn't actually mean they even know much about why they're telling you to do what they're telling you to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've actually been the chairperson of a safety committee in a laboratory,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't like take a class or something for that. There wasn't anything apart from like some years of experience in safety committees that in first aid classes and stuff that gave me any kind of real qualifications to hold that title, but
Mm-hmm.
I held it nonetheless.
Yeah. Well, and that's maybe we need to bring back, because I remember in middle school, wood shop. I signed up for wood shop. And what did we do for the first couple of days? We watched old film reels, and they were gruesome, showing what would happen if you didn't use a push rod on a table saw or something, like fingers being cut off and stuff, and people being crushed by things and stuff. And maybe we need that, because that explains the rationale behind these rules. It, like, safety equipment and safety procedures aren't just a thing that you go through the motions for. There's a reason for it. Like, hey, maybe we need to see that one video of the dude opening that cabinet and putting his hands on the live 480 volts and like dying right there. Like, that would, you'd be like, wait a minute, lockout, tagout, because I don't want to be
Right.
that guy.
Remember that cheesy safety video we saw a long time ago? There's like a guy climbing a ladder in a warehouse, and then all of a sudden he gets to the top, and you see this glove with like bratwurst in it, like go down on this giant nail sticking up, and like a bunch of ketchup squirts out of it, and he falls off the ladder. Ah!
Mm-hmm. But maybe that's what we need, because it's like a faceless rule. Otherwise, that people would not know the reasoning behind these rules. Like, why would you do that? And the implications of not following these rules. Like, why? Yeah, like, and it's got to be kind of gross, honestly, because shit.
Well, and I think they do that on purpose, and here's why. When you're doing stuff like that, it really helps if you kind of make fun of it and have fun with it, because you're still absorbing the information and you're associating actually having a good time with learning that information. So like it actually tends to stick a little bit more. And I think that's why when you go through these safety classes and you're like, no breathing, no pulse, call 911, and everybody laughs and stuff, like they're not like wagging their finger at you or anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's because you're creating positive associations with learning, and we should really encourage more of that in education across the board.
That's a really good point. Well, and I think also too, when you go to do one of these things that could be risky, maybe it'll come up in your mind like, oh yeah, that video where a dude fucking fell off a scissor lift, or the scissor lift fell down because they were doing stupid things. Even as goofy as it was, and obviously fake as it was, Although there's real world video for a lot of these dangerous things that probably should be shown. Like, hey, you know, that's a guy dying right there because they didn't do this one simple thing. All you had to do was put that little thing in there and put the padlock on it. It's all you had to do, and look at what happened, what resulted from the not doing that. And
Yeah. I saw that crane fall off the top of the Google Tower in Seattle.
mm-hmm.
Landed on a bunch of cars and killed a few people. And that wasn't even that guy's fault.
Mm-hmm.
Like somebody else didn't tighten the screws or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just your ass on the line, it's other people's too.
Well, yeah, and that goes into like the Boeing thing and stuff. And they're not just manufacturing aircraft, but they're responsible ultimately for the lives that are contained within this pressurized, impossible aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
I'm with Adam Savage, like looking at stuff like a 747. I would look at that and be like, yeah, there's no way that thing could actually fly. It's impossible. But it does. And
It's
like
magic.
Yeah, it kind of is. But all these little things, like you think, oh, it's inconsequential, tightening this bolt to a certain torque specification or something. Whatever. I'll just kind of feel it. But years down the road, that decision could impact somebody's life or many people's lives. Building infrastructure, bridges, cranes, and things like that. Like, yeah, it seems stupid that all these rules and everything, but there's a reason for them.
Something that civil engineers should take to heart.
Oh God. Yeah, stop smoking crack, you civil engineers. Oh man. Yeah.
The DARE program needs to visit civil engineers.
Dude,
crack is bad, okay?
That one off ramp on Highway 16, the one where cars were just driving off the edge. Like, who thought that was a good idea? But that's the thing too. It's like there are consequences to people thinking all you have to do is follow the rules. Like, well, they did. These people, they designed things according to proper specification, and look what happened. People are driving off a cliff, essentially. Bridges collapse, whole buildings collapse, and stuff like that. And like, that's part of engineering is, we take in all this information and try to make future projects a little bit better, a little more efficient, more safe. Yeah. But I think it's important that the people, I don't know. Well, you know me, I don't believe in the whole government rules thing. I think that's kind of stupid, but these systems do make sense. It's a logical thing. And there's a reason to follow all these safety procedures and use safety equipment. I don't know. I had a point, but I kind of lost it. It's too high.
I think it's sensible that governments are in charge of disseminating information like this. Not so sensible that there's fines attached with it, but you got to pay for these things, whatever. But I think if politics weren't such a theatrical shit show, they could actually focus on doing these things correctly and, keeping up with them and applying the scientific method to them and stuff, and actually, provide a decent and reliable service to the populace.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like oh, government equals bad. It's just shitty government. It's definitely a bad thing.
Yeah, for sure.
And there's a lot of shitty government out there.
Yeah, I think that there could be a private version of OSHA. And like we had touched on in the beginning, insurance would be the driving force behind that. That, hey, it, what do you know? It just so happens that everybody wins. We don't have to pay out as much money, and less people get harmed or killed. Everybody wins if we just follow these rules together. Yeah, I don't know, man. I'm still trying to get to that point. It's too hot.
Well, that might be a good time to call it.
Yeah.
Let's let Eric get out of his hard hat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man. It's. Oh yeah. You can also do cool things with your safety gear if you want to. Just yeah. Whew, man, even this vest is. Oh man. Ugh.
It's getting hot in here. Take off all your clothes.
All my safety gear. Oh, see, there you go. There's a great way to like support or to perpetuate the idea of safety gear is like make a catchy little parody song about stuff. And yeah, totally do that.
And remember, kids, don't stick a fork in the power socket.
Stick a fork in the power socket.